Hey guys, I wanted to do an urgent education. I forgot to put that in the notes. And I want to do a brief one on a section of the Liberty University training that I've done on our forgotten heroes. I know Juneteenth was Monday, and I was just pondering that and a lot of the narrative and the purposeful switching of history, as well as the ignorance of our true history. And it's fascinating, like the other day I was watching Fox and they were interviewing a former athlete who happened to be a black gentleman. And they were talking about, July 4th and Juneteenth. And, there's just this animosity a lot of times toward July 4th, especially with the 1619 Project fallacies. And he was talking about, Frederick Douglass and what he had to say about July 4th, like what is July 4th to me? But what he didn't include is that later Frederick Douglass, when he actually read the founding documents, including the Constitution, and he recognized the language that was put in the Declaration and the intent of the founding fathers to end slavery within, I believe it was 20 years post-signing of the Constitution, which was in, I believe, 1789. Because he saw and he read for himself, he understood that our founding fathers included language in these legal documents that would eventually lead to the ending of slavery. And so he completely switched his mentality when it came to America and what America stood for. And then he began working with Lincoln for the emancipation of slaves. And so, you got to know the whole history. It's like with the word, it's not parts of the word that's truth. It's the sum of the word that's truth. And the truth often lies between the tension of two seemingly opposing thoughts. And so I just recommend people that are honest and that have integrity to read the original documents, read the original letters and the words of our founding fathers. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the heroes who just happened to have a different skin color, who were black, that because of them, we have a country. And one of my favorite is Crispus Attucks. And he was the first man to give his life for this country. In fact, I think not only was he was the first black man, but he was like the first man that gave his life. And he was a freed slave who had become a whaler for the merchant marines. And he heard, like, their ship was docked in the Boston port, and he heard what he thought was a fire on the ship. And when he went up to the deck, he realized that his own country, Great Britain, was firing upon its citizens. And so he took up arms, and he went back below deck and got 55 of his shipmates to come out, and he gave his life so that we could be free. This event was known as the Boston Massacre, and it says, honor to Crispus Attucks, who was leader and voice that day, the first to defy, the first to die with Maverick, Parr, and Gray. Call it a riot, a revolution, his hand first clenched at the crown. His feet were the first in perilous place to pull the king's flag down. His breast was the first one rent apart, so that liberty's stream might flow. For our freedom now and forever, his head was first laid low. Call it riot or revolution or mob or crowd as you may, such deaths have been the seed of nations, such lives shall be honored for aye. The next one that is one of my favorites is George Middleton. So he was a freed slave. He was a member of the colonial militia called the Bucks of America, and they were battalions of free slaves that believed in the vision of liberty for all. And that's part of the legal language that was put in our Declaration so that we would have a legal standing to end slavery later. And he knew that freedom was the only way, freedom from Great Britain was the only way to end slavery because, and a lot of people don't realize that, the Revolutionary War was also an emancipation attempt because Great Britain was obstructing every effort. And their law was that they were forcing slavery on the colonists. And you could not say no. I mean, it was British law. And so what would happen is a lot of the slave ships would come over to the American ports, and it was against the law to turn them around. And so what they did is they bought the slaves, but they bought them as indentured servants. And so they would work about 7 years on a plot of land. And then at the end of the 7 years, that land was given to them. And then they were free. They were freemen, and they had their own land. They had their home and their family. The first slave was actually from a black man, because he had an indentured servant that was lazy and he refused to work. And he wouldn't let him go free. So it went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that that man would be a slave forever. And that actually began the practice of us owning slaves versus the indentured servant plan. It was also against the law if you inherited slaves to sell them, to free them until your death. So George Washington, you'll notice when he died, he freed his slaves, but he couldn't free his wives' slaves. And that law hadn't been changed in America. So when she died, she freed hers. So there was a legal aspect, and they were very litigious. They were very legally minded, and all of our founding documents are legal documents. So for George Middleton, fighting Great Britain that was obstructing the freeing of slaves was emancipation process. And he also knew that a lot of the colonies were attempting to outlaw it, including Virginia. Virginia was one of them that was attempting to, but the government of Great Britain wouldn't let it happen. And they would threaten the colonies with financial sanctions. And we were so new and young, that would have been the end of America. So Colonel George Mason, he expressed his frustration during our Constitution's ratification debates. He said this infernal traffic originated in the greed of British merchants. The British government constantly checked the attempts of Virginia to put a stop to it. So once our independence was declared, the newly formed states of America created a policy that any slave that helped fight for independence would be a free man forever. And then Roger Sherman, he was a delegate from Connecticut to the Federal Convention on the 22nd of August, 1787. He observed that the abolition of slavery seemed to be going on in the U.S. and that the good sense of the several states would probably by degrees complete it. So there were several things, that were going on. Well, anyway, George Middleton, he fought, and he was a citizen of the state of Massachusetts. He was a free man, and then he started the African Benevolent Society, in 1796 to help care for the widows and orphans of those that had been lost in battle. Another one is Peter Salem. He joined the Continental Army as a free man. He fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill. He received a Medal of Honor from George Washington in the battle because he was given credit for killing British Major General Pitcairn. Washington said that if it hadn't been for his bravery, the battle might have completely turned around in favor of the British. Ned Hector, he was another freed slave that fought in Brandywine and Germantown. They didn't go the way we wanted those battles, but he ended up saving the horses, and he refused to quit until he got the horses. And so he received honor. And then one of my favorites, I want to read a book about him, is James Fordinand. And he was the grandson of a slave, but he was a son of free blacks. And he was 14 years old when he entered into the battle for liberty. And he actually stood up in Philadelphia, and he heard the Declaration of Independence read aloud for the first time. I can just imagine what he felt. And one of our grievances against Britain was the slavery issue. That's actually in our declaration. And a lot of people, they never read the grievances, so they don't know that. So at 14, he joined the royal ship Lewis with Captain Stephen Decatur. In 1781, the ship was taken by the British. And so then James was taken as a prisoner, and the captain of the conquering ship, he took him onto his own ship, and he grew fond of the little boy, and he offered to take him home to Great Britain, and that he'd have just all kinds of amenities for being a companion to his son. I mean, he loved this kid, and the young boy refused the captain's offer. He said, "I have been taken prisoner for the liberties of my country and never will prove a traitor to her interests." And so he would be held captive for like 7 months before he was released in a prisoner exchange. And Phyllis Wheatley, she was born in Senegal, West Africa. She was sold into slavery at the age of 7, but her family took her in as a family member. They taught her how to read and write, and by the age of 14, she had published poems in a local paper, and she wrote a very famous poem about George Washington called "To His Excellency George Washington." She said, "Auspicious heaven shall fill with favoring gales where'er Columbia spreads her swelling sails. To every realm her peace, her charms display, and heavenly freedom spread her golden ray." So those are just some of them. We had Spaniards, we had women, the whole thing that women couldn't vote and all that wasn't true. That didn't happen until later on. And, women that fought. I mean, it's a neat history, but I just wanted to highlight the Black men and women that are true patriots, that fought for our country. I will forever be grateful to them that they did. So in celebration of recognizing the emancipation of slavery in this country, I just wanted to highlight them this week. So hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to do the hub teaching. If not tomorrow, it will be Friday. We'll continue our study of Revelation. So have a good night.